Welcome to Imagine BL Story. My name is Riev, and I'm wishing you a joyful, exciting, and love-filled holiday season. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's holiday special story. Dr. Keith Olsen had worked every Christmas for 10 years, and he'd perfected the art of making it look like a choice rather than a necessity. When colleagues asked, and they always asked every December without fail, he'd smile that practice smile and say something about giving the staff with families a chance to be home, about preferring the quiet of the hospital to the chaos of Minnesota winters and judgmental relatives who still thought he should have moved on by now. What he didn't say was that working Christmas meant he didn't have to sit alone in his apartment while Clarence the cat judged him for microwaving sad dinners and pretending the holiday didn't exist. Didn't have to remember the last Christmas that mattered, when Maya had been 4 years old and insisted they make snow angels in their pajamas before breakfast. Her small omega scent still undeveloped but already smelling like the strawberry shampoo she loved. Didn't have to think about how she'd gotten sick that same evening, how the fever had spiked so fast, how he'd held her in the ER. A different hospital, a different city, a different lifetime, and watched her slip away before midnight. 10 years later, Keith had become the trauma surgeon who saved everyone else's children on Christmas. And if that wasn't ironic enough to make the universe laugh, he didn't know what was. SG Memorial's ER was decorated with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness that only happened in hospitals trying to pretend illness and injury took holidays off. Tinsel drooped from the nurse's station. A plastic tree blinked colored lights in the corner, and someone had hung mistletoe in the break room as a joke that had resulted in exactly 0 romantic encounters and several uncomfortable moments between staff who didn't particularly like each other. "You're here again," Nurse Darcy said as Keith grabbed coffee from the break room at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve. She was a beta with 20 years of ER experience and absolutely no patience for Keith's martyrdom. "It's been 10 years, Keith. You know there's actual therapy for grief, right? Like, with licensed professionals who don't charge by the shift. I'm an omega who works in trauma surgery. I've had enough therapy to qualify as a licensed professional myself." Keith added 3 sugars to his coffee, knowing it would horrify Darcy, who drank hers black like a psychopath. Besides, someone has to save all the people who injure themselves with Christmas lights and deep fryers. It's a public service. Aha. And the fact that you've turned down every date offer in the past decade has nothing to do with hiding behind your scrubs. "I'm not hiding. I'm selective. There's a difference." Keith's omega scent, pine and coffee and something softer he tried to suppress, sharpened defensively. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a hot date with whatever disaster comes through those doors next." He didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 p.m., the ambulance bay doors burst open, winter wind howling through the ER as paramedics rushed in with a gurney. Keith's instincts kicked in before his brain fully processed the scene. Male, mid to late 30s, soaking wet, hypothermic, unconscious. The scent hit him second, cutting through antiseptic and cold lake water, ocean breeze and something distinctly alpha, expensive cologne mostly washed away but still clinging to skin. "John Doe, pulled from Lake Union 20 minutes ago," the lead paramedic reported, rattling off vitals while they transferred the patient to an ER bed. Car went off Aurora Bridge during the storm. Witnesses saw him get out of the vehicle before it sank, but he hit his head on debris. He was under for approximately 3 minutes before rescue pulled him out. Keith's omega instincts registered the alpha's distress before his medical training fully kicked in. The wrongness of that scent, the way it carried profound sadness underneath the ocean and eucalyptus notes. He shoved the instinct down hard. Patient first. Feelings never. "Glasgow coma scale?" Keith asked, already checking pupil response. 7 at scene, up to 9 in transit. Breathing on his own but labored. Core temp is 89 degrees. Hypothermia, near drowning, potential traumatic brain injury, and no identification. Merry Christmas, indeed. The next 3 hours were controlled chaos, warming protocols, CT scans, for fluids, constant monitoring. The patient, John Doe, because that's what they called people who arrived without wallets or ID or anyone looking for them, stabilized slowly. The head CT showed a concussion but no bleeding, no fractures, nothing that explained why he remained unconscious beyond the body's reasonable response to nearly dying in freezing water. By 3 a.m., Keith had done everything medicine could do for now. The patient was stable, warming slowly in the ICU, breathing steadily. Keith should have handed him off to the night staff, gone home, gotten a few hours of sleep before the official Christmas Day shift started at 7 a.m. Instead, he found himself sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside John Doe's bed, watching the alpha's chest rise and fall, and trying to figure out why his omega instincts were humming with concern for a complete stranger. The man was objectively attractive, Keith could admit that clinically. Dark hair plastered to his skull from the lake water, strong features even in unconsciousness, the kind of build that suggested either dedicated gym time or physical labor. There was a faded tan line on his left ring finger where a wedding band had been recently removed. Scars on his knuckles, old ones, the kind you got from childhood accidents or working with your hands. And that scent, even muted by medical-grade scent blockers and trauma, it was there. Ocean and eucalyptus, and something that made Keith's long-dormant omega instincts want to curl up close and offer comfort. "Who are you?" Keith asked the unconscious Alpha quietly. "And what were you doing on Aurora Bridge at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve?" The patient didn't answer, which was for the best. Keith had enough complications in his life without adding mystery alphas who smelled like homesickness and expensive cologne. His phone buzzed. A text from Darcy. "Go home. I'm watching your hot coma patient. Nothing's going to happen in the next 4 hours except you getting more attached to someone who probably has a whole life you don't know about." Keith texted back. "I'm not attached. I'm being thorough." Darcy's response. "Sure. And I'm the sugar plum fairy. Go home." Keith went home, but only because hospital policy frowned on doctors sleeping in patient chairs. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Small, tidy, decorated with a modest tree that Clarence had knocked over twice already. The cat in question glared at him from the couch, orange and judgmental. "Don't start," Keith told him, collapsing onto the couch and accidentally sitting on Clarence's tail. The cat yowled indignantly. "I know. I'm home at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning, alone except for you, obsessing over a patient who doesn't even know his own name. Very healthy, very well-adjusted." Clarence's expression clearly said, "I've been telling you this for years." Keith managed 4 hours of sleep before his alarm dragged him back to consciousness. Christmas morning arrived gray and wet, typical Seattle winter, the kind of weather that made you question why anyone chose to live in the Pacific Northwest. He showered, dressed in clean scrubs, stopped at the 24-hour diner for coffee and a breakfast sandwich he wouldn't have time to eat, and headed back to the hospital. John Doe's status hadn't changed overnight. Still unconscious, still stable, still completely unidentified. The police had run fingerprints but gotten no hits in local databases. No missing persons reports matched his description. No one had called looking for him. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere, Keith thought, or like he'd wanted to disappear. The thought bothered him more than it should. Christmas Day in the ER was surprisingly quiet. A few heart attacks, one cooking fire, a kid who'd gotten a toy stuck somewhere it definitely shouldn't have been. Keith handled consults, checked on post-op patients, and found excuses to stop by the ICU every hour to check on his John Doe. "You know he's not actually your patient anymore," Dr. Martinez said when she caught Keith lingering outside the ICU for the third time. She was the attending on duty, a beta with exceptional instincts for when her residents were developing inappropriate attachments. "Neuro took over his care this morning." "I know. I'm just following up." "Aha. And the fact that he's an unmated alpha with a scent that I can smell from here even through suppressants has nothing to do with it." Keith's omega scent soured defensively. "I'm professional. You're lonely," Dr. Martinez interrupted, not unkindly. "And it's Christmas. And you've been working this shift for 10 years, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. So I'm going to say this as your boss and your friend. If you want to check on him, check on him. But if you're going to get attached, at least be honest with yourself about why." She left before Keith could formulate a response that didn't prove her point. At 2 p.m., Keith was filling out discharge paperwork in the nurse's station when Darcy appeared, looking far too smug for someone working Christmas. "Your mystery man is awake," she announced, "and asking for water, pain meds, and to know where the hell he is. In that order." Keith's omega instincts perked up immediately. Concern, relief, curiosity all tangling together. He forced himself to walk to the ICU at a normal pace instead of running. John Doe was indeed awake, propped up in bed and looking confused, in pain, and vaguely terrified. Those eyes, Keith hadn't seen them open before, were a striking blue-gray, currently wide with disorientation. "Hello?" Keith said, slipping into his doctor voice. Calm, professional, absolutely not noticing how the alpha's scent brightened slightly when Keith entered the room. "I'm Dr. Olsen. I treated you when you came in last night. How are you feeling?" "Like I drowned and someone brought me back to regret it," the patient said, and his accent was unexpectedly Australian, broad and unmistakable. "Where am I?" "SG Memorial Hospital." You were pulled from Lake Union last night after a car accident on Aurora Bridge. Do you remember what happened? Essentially become. The Alpha's brow furrowed, pain flashing across his features. I remember driving. Rain. Something in the road, dear. Maybe? I swerved. He paused, concentration evident. Hit the barrier. Car went over. I got out before it sank, but something hit my head. After that, he gestured vaguely. Nothing. Blank. That's not uncommon with head trauma. The CT showed a concussion but no bleeding. Your memories should come back gradually. Keith pulled up the chair, close enough to examine pupil response. Definitely not close enough to smell the Alpha better. What's your name? The Alpha opened his mouth, then stopped. Frowned. Tried again. I don't know. Do you remember where you're from? What you were doing in Seattle? More frowning. More frustrated concentration. Australia. I'm from Australia. I can hear it in my voice. But I can't. Panic started creeping into his scent. Sharp and distressed. Keith's omega instincts responded before he could stop them. Leaning closer, scent shifting to something calming. Hey, it's okay. Retrograde amnesia from head trauma is temporary in most cases. Your memories will come back. What if they don't? The Alpha's blue-gray eyes locked onto Keith's. What if I don't remember who I am? Then we figure it out together. For now, you're safe, you're healing, and you're not alone. Keith smiled, surprising himself. And it's Christmas, so you're getting the premium hospital experience. Terrible food, scratchy blankets, and a doctor who's too stubborn to go home. Lucky you. The Alpha laughed. A rough, painful sound, but genuine. Premium experience, yeah? Does that include better pain meds? Because my head feels like someone used it for cricket practice. I can definitely arrange better pain meds. But first, we need to call you something other than John Doe. Keith pulled out his tablet. Any preferences? We could go classic John, Joe, Jack. Or creative. I once had a patient choose Thor for his hospital stay. Thor. The Alpha's mouth twitched. Bit ambitious for a bloke who can't remember his own name. Fair point. How about we keep it simple until your memory comes back? John work for you? Yeah, John's fine. The Alpha, John, settled back against the pillows, still looking lost but less panicked. And you're Dr. Olsen? Keith. You can call me Keith. Keith. John tested the name, and something in his scent warmed. Thanks for saving my life, I suppose, and for not leaving me alone on Christmas. Keith's chest tightened unexpectedly. Well, I work every Christmas anyway. You're just giving me something more interesting to do than remove turkey bones from people's throats. That happens? You'd be surprised what happens in an ER on Christmas. They talked for another 20 minutes. Keith explaining injuries, treatment plans, what to expect from the amnesia. John asking questions with dry humor that surprised Keith. Making self-deprecating comments about being the most expensive Christmas present no one asked for, and wondering if his memory loss meant he could skip whatever embarrassing moments his past self had accumulated. When Keith finally left to handle actual doctor responsibilities, his omega scent was lighter than it had been in years, and he absolutely refused to examine why. The next 72 hours established a pattern Keith knew was dangerous but couldn't seem to stop. He'd check on John between shifts, during breaks, whenever he had 15 minutes and a weak excuse. They'd talk about nothing, about everything, carefully avoiding the big questions like who John really was and why Keith kept coming back. John was funny, Keith discovered. Wickedly sarcastic with that Australian accent that got thicker when he was tired or emotional. He made jokes about his predicament. At least I don't remember any embarrassing childhood moments. And maybe past me was a terrible person, and this is karma giving me a fresh start. But underneath the humor, Keith could sense the fear, the not knowing, the possibility that when memories returned, John might not like who he'd been. On December 27th, Keith brought dinner from the cafeteria, turkey sandwiches and chips that tasted like cardboard and regret. Gourmet, John said appreciatively, accepting the sandwich. Does the premium Christmas package include food poisoning, or is that extra? Included, along with questionable jello and coffee that violates the Geneva Convention. Keith settled into the visitor's chair, which had essentially become his chair over the past 3 days. How's physical therapy going? Exhausting. Apparently, nearly drowning does terrible things to your muscle strength. John flexed his hand experimentally. The therapist says I'm recovering well, though. Should be walking without assistance in a few days. That's good. Means you're healing. Keith picked at his sandwich. Any memories coming back? Fragments. Nothing useful. John's sense shifted. Frustration and something deeper. Sadder. I remembered loving someone. Not who, just the feeling of it. Love and loss all mixed together. And I remembered being really, really sad before the accident. Like, bone-deep sad. Keith understood that feeling intimately. The police are still trying to identify you, running your information through international databases now. Someone's probably looking for you. Maybe. John didn't sound convinced. Or maybe I left because no one was. The words hit too close to Keith's own experience. He set down his sandwich, suddenly not hungry. Can I tell you something? Keith asked quietly. Something I don't usually talk about? John's alpha sense shifted. Attentive, concerned, protective in a way that made Keith's omega instincts hum. Of course. I work every Christmas because 10 years ago, my daughter died on Christmas Day. She was 4. Sudden illness, spiked fever, organ failure. Gone in less than 12 hours. Keith stared at his hands. Her name was Maya, and I haven't said her name out loud to anyone in, I don't know, years. Keith, I became a surgeon because I couldn't save her, so I save everyone else's kids instead. Every Christmas, every shift, every patient. It's not healthy, it's not healing, it's just what I do. He looked up, meeting John's eyes. So when you say no one's looking for you, when you talk about being sad before the accident, I understand. More than you know. John's hand found Keith's across the space between bed and chair. Warm, steady, alpha strength tempered with gentleness. Thank you, John said, for telling me, for trusting me with that. Thank you for listening, and for not giving me the she'd want you to move on speech everyone always gives. To hell with that speech. Grief doesn't have a timeline, and loving someone you lost doesn't mean you have to stop living in the space they left behind. John squeezed Keith's hand. But maybe it means finding people who understand that space, who doesn't expect you to fill it or ignore it. Just live around it. Keith's vision blurred. He blinked hard. When did you get so wise for a guy who doesn't remember his own name? Natural talent. Comes with the accent. John's thumb stroked over Keith's knuckles. Stay? Just for a bit. Keith stayed until his next shift started. Their hands linked, sense gradually blending in the quiet hospital room. Pine and ocean, coffee and eucalyptus, grief and tentative hope mixing into something new. The hospital staff noticed, of course. By December 28th, the nurses were taking bets on when Keith would admit he was falling for his patient. Darcy was running the pool. You're spending every break in there, she said, cornering Keith at the nurse's station. And before you say it's a medical concern, I've seen medical concerns. This is not that. He has amnesia and no one is looking for him. I'm providing emotional support during recovery. Keith signed off on a chart with more force than necessary. You're providing omega comfort scenting to an unmated alpha who looks at you like you hung the moon. There's a difference. I am not. Keith stopped because he absolutely was. Had been unconsciously scenting John's room, his blankets, bringing items from home without realizing it. Classic omega nesting behavior around a compatible alpha. Shit. Yeah, shit. Darcy's expression softened. Look, I get it. He's attractive, vulnerable, Australian, and apparently the first person you've connected with since Maya. But Keith, he's gonna remember who he is eventually. And when he does, there might be a whole life waiting for him. A life that doesn't include you. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're falling in love with a man who might disappear the moment his memories come back. Keith didn't have a response to that, mostly because it was true. On December 29th, John walked without assistance for the first time, making it from his bed to the window with Keith hovering nearby like an anxious mother hen. I'm not going to fall, John said, amused by Keith's omega hovering. You might fall. You nearly drowned 4 days ago. Falling is statistically probable. Your medical confidence is truly inspiring. John reached the window, looking out over Seattle's gray winter landscape. Do you think I lived here? Before? The car you were driving was a rental, picked up from SeaTac Airport 3 days before the accident, so probably not permanently. But you came here for a reason. Maybe I was running away. Maybe I came here to... John trailed off, frown deepening. What? I don't know. The thought's gone. He turned back to Keith, and his alpha scent carried frustration. It's maddening, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. It's right there, just out of reach. Keith moved closer without thinking, his omega instincts responding to the alpha's distress. It'll come back. Your brain is still healing. What if I don't want it to come back? John asked quietly. What if who I was before was someone I don't want to be again? Then you choose who you want to be now. Memory or no memory, that's always a choice. John's hand came up to cup Keith's face, gentle, questioning. And who I want to be now includes knowing you better. Is that allowed? Is that something you'd want? Keith's heart was pounding, his omega scent flooding with want and fear in equal measure. John, I know I don't even know my real name. I know I might remember a whole life tomorrow that doesn't include you. But right now, in this moment, I know I feel more alive talking to you than I can remember feeling about anything else. John's thumb stroked Keith's cheekbone. So I'm asking, is this just omega kindness? Or is this something else? It's something else, Keith admitted, his voice rough. It's been something else since you woke up and made terrible jokes about drowning. And it terrifies me because Darcy's right, you're going to remember who you are, and that person might not want this. Might not want me. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. But Keith, John leaned closer, their sense completely tangled now. Right now I want this. I want you. If you'll have me. Keith kissed him. It was soft, tentative testing. John's lips were warm despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning, and he tasted like the terrible coffee Keith had brought him earlier. The alpha made a sound low in his throat, surprise and pleasure and pure alpha satisfaction, pulling Keith closer with careful strength. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, John's scent was pure contentment. Well, that answered that question. We should stop, Keith said, not moving away. This is wildly inappropriate. You're my patient. You have amnesia. I'm taking advantage. Keith, shut up and kiss me again. So Keith did. New Year's Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth, Seattle's winter taking a brief pause to offer almost pleasant weather. John had been moved out of ICU and into a regular room, his physical recovery progressing well even as his memories remained frustratingly absent. The hospital was planning to discharge him to a transitional facility in 2 days, protocol for patients with nowhere else to go. Keith had spent the past 48 hours trying not to think about what happened after discharge, trying not to imagine John in some sterile facility, alone, waiting for memories that might never return, trying not to acknowledge that he'd fallen completely in love with a man whose real name he didn't even know. You're brooding, John observed from his bed, where he was attempting to solve a crossword puzzle Keith had brought him. I can smell it. Pine trees and anxiety. Very festive. I'm not brooding. I'm thinking about how you're going to miss me when they discharge me to the sad Omega facility for people nobody wants. It's not a sad Omega facility. Keith stopped. Wait, Omega. John looked up, confusion crossing his features. I don't know why I said that, but I know I'm an alpha. I can sense you, feel the pull. So why did I say Omega? Keith's medical instincts kicked in. What else do you know? Don't think about it. Just say whatever comes. Lucas. The name came out strangled. His name was Lucas. He was mine. My son. My boy. John's hands were shaking, his alpha scent flooding with grief. Oh God, I remember. I had a son. And he's. Breathe, Keith said, moving to the bed, taking John's hands. Just breathe. The memories are coming back. It's going to be overwhelming, but you're safe. I'm here. He died. In a car accident. And Emily, my wife, she died too. Couldn't save them. Couldn't. John's breathing was ragged, tears streaming down his face. We were in Sydney. I was driving. Another car ran a red light. I survived and they didn't, and the full memory slammed into him visibly. Keith watched John's face transform from confusion to recognition to absolute devastation as 8 months of suppressed grief crashed through whatever walls the amnesia had built. I'm Brad, John said. No, Brad said, his voice breaking. Brad Fletcher. And I came to Seattle to scatter my son's ashes because this is where Emily grew up, and I thought if I brought him here to her home, maybe they'd both finally be at rest. And then I was going to. He stopped, but Keith understood. The timeline made sickening sense now. Australian billionaire, recent tragedy, Christmas Eve on Aurora Bridge with no ID. You were going to end it, Keith said quietly. Brad's eyes met his, raw and honest. I didn't want to live in a world without them. Couldn't see the point. So I came here, scattered Lucas's ashes at Pike Place Market like Emily always talked about, and then I was going to... He swallowed hard. But the car accident happened first. The bridge, the water. And then I woke up with you. Keith should have felt betrayed. Should have felt used, manipulated, something. Instead, he just felt overwhelming sadness for this alpha who'd lost everything and hadn't seen a reason to keep going. And now? Keith asked. Now that you remember? Now I don't know. If you're still listening, I'm glad you're here. So tell me, what city in the world would you love to spend Christmas in aside your current one? Drop it below and let's get back to the story. Brad's hands tightened on Keith's. Because the person I was before, that Brad Fletcher who built an empire and had a family and lost everything, he's a stranger to me right now. And the person I've been these past 8 days doesn't know how to reconcile those two versions. Keith's breath caught. What are you remembering? Everything. All at once. Brad's voice was strained. His alpha scent flooding with overwhelming grief. Lucas. Emily. The accident. 8 months of barely functioning. Coming here to Seattle because I didn't know what else to do. I remember standing at Pike Place Market scattering my son's ashes and feeling nothing. Just emptiness. And the bridge. Brad met his eyes, honest and raw. I wasn't trying to die. I was just driving. In the rain. Not paying attention because nothing seemed to matter anymore. The deer, the swerve, it was an accident. A real one. He swallowed hard. But if I'm being completely honest, if the water had taken me, I wouldn't have fought very hard to survive. Keith understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. And now I'm terrified, Brad admitted. Because these past 8 days with you, they've been the first time since the accident that I felt anything other than grief. And I don't know if that's real or if it's just escape. Amnesia giving me permission to be someone else for a while. Then we don't rush it, Keith said. Even as his omega instincts screamed at him to comfort, to claim, to make this alpha stay. You need time to process everything that's come back. And I need... He stopped, forcing honesty. I need to not fall in love with someone who might disappear the moment he remembers he has a whole life waiting somewhere else. I wouldn't disappear. You have a company in Australia, Brad. Employees, responsibilities, a life you built. You can't just abandon that because you had a nice week with a doctor in Seattle. Brad's jaw tightened. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to heal. Really heal. Not just physically. Keith pulled his hands back, putting professional distance between them even though it hurt. You need therapy, time to grieve properly, space to figure out who you are now that you remember who you were. And I need to not be your escape route from processing trauma. The words were sensible, rational, everything Keith's medical training told him was right. They also felt like swallowing glass. You're right, Brad said finally, his alpha scent heavy with resignation. You're absolutely right. I just don't want you to be right. Yeah, me either. They sat in uncomfortable silence until Darcy knocked on the door, apologetic but firm. Dr. Olsen, you're needed in the ER. Multi-car pileup on I-5. Keith stood, grateful for the escape and hating himself for it. I have to go. But Brad, for what it's worth, these 8 days mattered. To me, regardless of what happens next. To me too, Brad said quietly. More than you know. Keith left before he could do something stupid like kiss him goodbye. The next 48 hours were complicated in ways Keith hadn't anticipated. Brad's identity confirmation triggered a cascade of notifications. His Australian lawyer, his company's board of directors, even a few persistent journalists who'd been tracking the missing billionaire story. Brad handled it with surprising grace, making calls from his hospital room with the same dry humor he'd shown as John Doe. But Keith could see the weight settling back onto his shoulders with each conversation. My lawyer wants me on a flight to Sydney tomorrow, Brad said when Keith stopped by during a rare break. Apparently my extended absence has created some corporate chaos that needs immediate attention. Are you well enough to fly? Medically? You tell me. You're the doctor. Brad's smile was tired. Emotionally? Probably not. But that's never stopped me before. Keith did a final evaluation, cleared him for travel with recommendations for follow-up care in Australia, prescribed pain medication for the lingering headaches, and carefully didn't think about how this was goodbye. There's one problem, Brad said as Keith was finishing the discharge paperwork. I don't exactly have anywhere to stay until my flight tomorrow evening. The hotel where I left my things has already cleared out my room, and I'd rather not spend my last night in Seattle in an airport hotel. Keith made the offer before his brain could veto it. Stay with me. Keith, Medically speaking, you shouldn't be alone yet. The headaches, the memory integration, the emotional processing, you need monitoring. It was a flimsy excuse and they both knew it. And personally speaking, I'd like one more night before you disappear to the other side of the world. Brad's alpha sense softened. Are you sure? No. But I'm offering anyway. Keith's apartment was exactly as embarrassing as he'd feared. Small, cluttered with medical journals, dominated by Clarence the cat who took one look at Brad and hissed like a demon. He hates me, Brad observed, watching the orange menace retreat under the couch. He hates everyone. It's his defining characteristic. Keith grabbed the cat treats. Give him 5 minutes and food. He's a mercenary. Sure enough, Clarence emerged 3 minutes later, motivated by treats and apparently willing to tolerate the alpha's presence if it came with snacks. By the time Keith returned from changing out of his scrubs, Brad was on the couch with 20 pounds of purring cat in his lap. Traitor, Keith told Clarence. He has excellent taste, Brad countered, scratching behind the cat's ears. Recognizes alpha quality when he sees it. They ordered Thai food and ate on the couch. Clarence wedged between them like a furry chaperone. It felt domestic in a way that made Keith's chest ache. This glimpse of what could be if circumstances were different. If Brad lived in Seattle instead of Sydney. If grief and responsibility weren't pulling him back across the ocean. Tell me about Lucas, Keith said quietly. If you want to. Brad was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling on Clarence's fur. He was 6, obsessed with trains, the old-fashioned kind, steam engines and vintage carriages. We'd spend weekends at railway museums, and he'd memorize every detail. His voice was rough but steady. He had Emily's eyes, her laugh, her ability to find joy in the smallest things. I was the serious one, always working, always building the company. But Lucas and Emily, they reminded me why I was building it. What actually mattered. The accident wasn't your fault, Keith said. Logically, I know that. The other driver ran a red light. I couldn't have prevented it. Brad's alpha scent went heavy with old pain. But I was driving. I survived and they didn't. And logic doesn't touch that kind of guilt. No, it doesn't. Keith shifted closer. Maya died of an illness I couldn't diagnose fast enough. Couldn't treat effectively enough. I was her father and a doctor, and I still couldn't save her. The logic of sometimes medicine fails doesn't touch the guilt of I failed her. How do you live with it? I don't. Not well anyway. I work every Christmas to avoid feeling it. I haven't dated in 10 years because getting close to someone means risking that kind of loss again. I tell myself I'm healing, but really I'm just surviving. Keith met Brad's eyes. Which is why I meant what I said at the hospital. You need real help. Real therapy. Not just me being a band-aid for 8 days of amnesia. I know. Brad's hand found Keith's across Clarence's bulk. But I want you to know, these 8 days weren't escape. They were the first time since the accident that I remembered what it felt like to want to be alive. To look forward to something. To feel anything other than grief. That's because you had amnesia giving you permission not to grieve. Maybe. Or maybe it's because you permitted me to be someone other than the grieving widower. To just be Brad. Or John. Or whoever I was when I wasn't carrying all that weight. His thumb stroked over Keith's knuckles. I'm going back to Sydney tomorrow. I have to. But Keith, I don't want this to be goodbye forever. Keith's omega instincts were screaming at him to agree, to promise anything that kept this connection alive. His rational brain knew better. Then let's not make promises we don't know if we can keep, Keith said carefully. You go back to Australia. Deal with your company, your grief, your life. Get the therapy you need. And if, in a few months, you still want to talk, if this wasn't just 8 days of escape, then we'll talk. As friends. And see where it goes. Friends, Brad repeated. And his scent carried disappointment but also understanding. I can do friends. Good. Because I'm terrible at relationships but excellent at sarcastic text messages. Brad laughed. And the sound settled something in Keith's chest. They could do this. Could stay connected without the pressure of defining what they were. Could give each other space to heal while leaving the door open for something more. When Brad's flight time approached the next evening, Keith drove him to the airport, Clarence's judgmental meowing from his carrier suggesting the cat had opinions about this development. You brought the cat? Brad asked, amused. He wanted to say goodbye. Also, I have a shift after this and he can't be home alone for 12 hours. My neighbor will pick him up. Keith pulled into the departure area. Clarence, say goodbye to Brad. Clarence hissed. He likes you. Keith translated. Clearly. Brad reached through the carrier to scratch the cat's head, getting a reluctant purr in response. Then he turned to Keith, his alpha scent thick with things unsaid. Thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For giving me these days. For not letting me make impulsive decisions about what we are before I'm ready to make any decisions. Thank you for terrible Australian jokes and making me laugh on Christmas for the first time in 10 years. Keith's throat was tight. Text me when you land. And Brad? Actually go to therapy. Please. I will. Promise. Brad leaned across the console, hesitated, then kissed Keith's forehead, gentle, chaste, full of possibility. See you, Keith. See you. Keith watched Brad disappear into the terminal, Clarence yowling mournfully from the back seat, and let himself feel the full weight of goodbye. Then he drove to work because that's what he did. Survived. One shift at a time. The first text came 3 days later. Brad, made it to Sydney. Jet lag is hell. Clarence would hate it here. Too hot. Too many birds to judge through windows. Keith, Clarence judges all birds equally. It's very democratic of him. How are you doing? Brad, drowning in work. But I found a therapist. First session tomorrow. She specializes in grief counseling. Keith, good. Proud of you. Brad, weird thing to be proud of someone for. But I'll take it. The texts became routine. Daily at first, Brad sharing observations about returning to his old life. Keith sending photos of Clarence in increasingly absurd positions. Then every few days, longer messages about therapy sessions, difficult memories, small victories in processing grief. Keith started seeing his own therapist again, the one he'd quit after 3 sessions 10 years ago because talking about it didn't bring Maya back. He learned, slowly, that healing wasn't betrayal, that loving someone new didn't erase the person you'd lost, that survival could eventually become living if you let it. February brought Valentine's Day and a text from Brad that made Keith's heart stop. Brad, weird question. Is it normal to feel guilty about being happy? Had a good day at work today. Solved a major project issue. Felt proud of myself. And then immediately felt like shit because Lucas will never have good days. And how dare I enjoy mine? Keith, completely normal. Maya died and the world kept turning. People kept being happy. I hated them for it. Hated myself when I caught myself laughing at something. Brad, how do you get past that? Keith, you don't. You just learn to let the good moments exist alongside the grief. They don't cancel each other out. You can miss Lucas desperately and still feel proud of your work. Both things are true. Brad, my therapist said something similar. Easier to believe coming from you. Keith, that's because I have Clarence's endorsement. Very powerful. Brad, how is the orange overlord? Keith, currently sitting on my chest at 3 a.m. Send help. March brought Keith's first day off in 10 years. Darcy literally forced him to take a vacation day, threatening to have him removed from the schedule if he showed up. You've been smiling, she said suspiciously, and texting, and actually leaving on time instead of picking up extra shifts. What's going on? Nothing. I'm just trying to have a life outside work. Does this life include a certain Australian alpha who texts you constantly? Keith's omega scent gave him away before he could deny it. We're friends. Friends who are clearly in love with each other, but too scared to admit it. We're not, it's complicated. He's in Sydney. I'm here, we're both dealing with grief. Aha. And when he asks you to visit, what then? Keith didn't have an answer, mostly because he'd been thinking about exactly that for weeks. The invitation came in April, during a video call that had become their weekly ritual. I have a crazy idea, Brad said, his face pixelated on Keith's phone screen but still unfairly attractive. And you can absolutely say no. That's a terrible way to start a crazy idea pitch. I'm coming to a conference in San Francisco in May. Sustainable Energy Summit. 3 days of boring corporate nonsense. Brad's alpha scent came through even over video, nervous. Hopeful. You could fly down. We could have dinner. Catch up in person instead of through screens. Keith's heart was racing. Brad. As friends. Brad added quickly. Just dinner. Nothing complicated. I miss you. Miss talking to you in person. I miss seeing Clarence judge me in real time instead of through photos. Clarence isn't invited to San Francisco. Tragic. Will you come anyway? Keith knew he should say no. Should maintain distance. Should let whatever this was fade naturally instead of feeding it with in-person visits. Yes, he said instead. I'll come. Brad's smile could have powered the entire city. Yeah, Yeah, but you're buying dinner. I've seen your company's stock price. You can afford it. Deal. San Francisco in May was beautiful, warm, sunny, the kind of weather that made Keith understand why people paid obscene rent to live there. He met Brad at a restaurant in North Beach, his omega instincts going haywire the moment he saw the alpha waiting outside. For months had changed Brad. He looked healthier. The haunted edge gone from his eyes, his alpha scent clearer, less weighted with unprocessed grief. He'd gotten a haircut, filled out slightly, and smiled more easily. But the way he looked at Keith hadn't changed at all. "Hi," Brad said, and his accent was thicker than Keith remembered. "Hi yourself." Keith's omega scent was probably broadcasting his feelings to the entire block. But he didn't care. "You look good. Therapy and regular sleep. Revolutionary concepts." Brad gestured to the restaurant. "Shall we?" Dinner was supposed to be casual. Catching up. Friends reconnecting. It was absolutely a date. They talked about everything: Brad's progress in therapy, the breakthrough moment when he'd finally cried about Lucas instead of just feeling numb, Keith's own therapy sessions, the decision to finally clean out Maya's room and donate her things to children's hospitals, the ways grief had shifted from sharp agony to dull ache, how they'd both learned to carry it differently. "I'm dating again," Keith admitted over dessert. "Or trying to. Darcy set me up with an alpha from radiology. We've been out twice." Brad's alpha scent soured immediately. Jealousy, sharp and unmistakable. "Oh, that's good. You should date." "It's terrible, actually. He's nice, but there's no chemistry. I spend the whole time wishing I was texting you instead." Keith met Brad's eyes. "Which isn't fair to him or to me or to you. Because we said friends. And I'm not being a good friend if I'm using you as the standard I measure everyone else against." "Keith, I'm falling in love with you," Keith interrupted, his omega scent flooding with terrified honesty. "Have been falling for months. And I don't know what to do about it because you live in Sydney and I live in Seattle and we're both still processing massive grief, and this could be the worst possible timing." Brad reached across the table, taking Keith's hand. "I'm falling in love with you too. Probably have been since you brought me terrible Christmas dinner in the hospital. And you're right, the timing is awful. But Keith, I don't want to wait for perfect timing that might never come. I don't want to be smart or sensible or any of the things I've been my whole life. I just want you." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try, really try, not as friends, as whatever we are, whatever we could be." Brad's thumb stroked over Keith's knuckles. "I know it's complicated. I know long distance is hard. I know we're both still healing. But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Keith's heart was pounding. "I have a job, a life in Seattle. I can't just." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if you'd be willing to figure it out together. Maybe I visit Seattle more often. Maybe you come to Sydney. Maybe eventually one of us makes a bigger change, but not yet. Not until we're ready." Brad squeezed his hand. "I'm just asking for a chance." Every rational part of Keith's brain was screaming that this was too fast, too risky, too complicated. But his omega instincts, his heart, the part of him that had been slowly coming back to life over the past 4 months, all of it was screaming yes. "Okay," Keith said. "Yes, let's try." Brad's smile was incandescent. Yeah. But if Clarence hates you when you visit Seattle, the whole thing's off. Clarence already loves me. He just has trouble expressing it. That's what I tell myself too." They kissed over the remains of tiramisu, and Keith's omega instincts sang with rightness. Not perfect timing. Not ideal circumstances. Just two broken people choosing to try anyway. Choosing hope over fear. Choosing each other despite all the logical reasons not to. When they pulled apart, Brad was grinning. "So, how long are you in San Francisco?" 2 days. "I have a hotel room." "That's very presumptuous of you. You're welcome to get your own room." Or, Brad's alpha scent carried playful heat. "You could share mine, as my boyfriend, if that's what we're calling this." Keith's heart did something complicated. "Boyfriend? I like that. Good. Because I'm keeping you." They made it back to Brad's hotel barely. The moment the door closed, they were on each other, months of tension and wanting finally allowed release. Brad's alpha scent was overwhelming, possessive but gentle. Everything Keith's omega instincts had been craving. "Are you sure?" Brad asked, even as his hands were mapping Keith's body. "We don't have to." "I'm sure. I'm so sure." Keith pulled him into another kiss. "I've been sure since Christmas. Just took me 4 months to admit it." Making love to Brad was everything Keith had imagined and nothing like it. Gentle and fierce by turns, Brad's alpha strength tempered with care, Keith's omega submission freely given instead of forced. They learned each other's bodies, sensed tangling until the whole room smelled like them. Pine and ocean, coffee and eucalyptus, healing and hope and new beginnings. Afterward, wrapped in hotel sheets with Brad's arm around him, Keith felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Complete. Not fixed. Grief didn't work that way. But whole in a way he'd forgotten was possible. "I love you," Brad said against his hair. "Probably shouldn't say it this soon, but I do. I love you too." Keith pressed closer. "And I'm terrified." "Yeah, me too. But we'll figure it out." They spent the next 2 days in San Francisco acting like normal boyfriends, walking through Golden Gate Park, eating too much dim sum, talking about everything and nothing. Brad's conference was mostly abandoned in favor of spending time together, and Keith couldn't bring himself to feel guilty about it. When Keith flew back to Seattle, it was with Brad's scent on his clothes and a promise to visit Sydney in July. The long-distance relationship was exactly as hard as everyone warned. Time zones meant missed calls, work meant canceled video chats, and the physical distance was torture when Keith's omega instincts wanted to be near his alpha. But they made it work through stubborn determination and excessive texting and counting down days until the next visit. Brad visited Seattle in June, met Keith's colleagues, charmed Darcy with Australian coffee snobbery, and won Clarence over completely by bringing expensive cat treats from Sydney. "He likes you better than me now," Keith complained, watching his cat purr in Brad's lap. "That's because I respect his refined palate." Brad scratched behind Clarence's ears. "Unlike someone who feeds him grocery store kibble. He's a cat, not a food critic. Tell him that." Keith visited Sydney in July, saw Brad's world. The penthouse overlooking the harbor, the company headquarters, the life Brad had built. It was overwhelming and impressive and made Keith acutely aware of how different their lives were. "You could stay," Brad said on Keith's last night, both of them on the balcony watching the Sydney Opera House light up. "Not permanently, not yet, but longer than a week. Work remote for a while. See if you like it here. I'm a trauma surgeon. I can't exactly work remote." "No, but you could explore options. Sydney has excellent hospitals. Your skills would transfer." Brad's arm tightened around Keith's waist. "I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm just asking you to consider if maybe there's a version of your life that could work here. With me." Keith had been thinking about exactly that for weeks. About how Seattle held mostly memories, good ones of Maya, painful ones of the decades since. About how his job was satisfying but not fulfilling. How he'd been going through motions for so long he'd forgotten what actually wanting something felt like. "Let me think about it," he said. "It's a big decision." "I know. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." In August, Keith applied to 3 major hospitals in Sydney. In September, he got offers from 2. In October, he gave notice at SG Memorial, endured Darcy's tears and threats and eventual acceptance, and started the complicated process of international medical licensing. "You're really doing this," Darcy said during his going-away party. "Moving to Australia for an alpha you've been dating for 6 months." "I'm moving to Australia for myself," Keith corrected. "For a fresh start. For the chance to build something new instead of just surviving in the shadow of what I lost." "Brad being there is just the entire reason you're doing it?" "A significant factor," Keith admitted, "but not the only one. Maya died in Seattle. I became a surgeon in Seattle. I've spent 10 years here being the grieving father who works every Christmas. And I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be Keith who moved halfway across the world for love and possibility, and because life is short and I'm done wasting it." Darcy hugged him hard. "Text me constantly. And if that alpha breaks your heart, I'm flying to Sydney to break his face." "He won't. But I appreciate the violence." Keith moved to Sydney in November, settling into Brad's penthouse while he looked for his own place. Clarence adapted to Australian life with surprising ease, spending hours judging Sydney's bird population from the balcony. Starting at Sydney Central Hospital was terrifying and exhilarating. New colleagues, new systems, new challenges. But Keith was good at his job, and trauma was trauma regardless of continent. He fell into the rhythm quickly, making friends, finding his place, and coming home to Brad every night. That was the revelation. The domesticity of it. Cooking together, falling asleep tangled together, waking up to Brad's alpha scent and Clarence's judgmental meowing for breakfast. Building a life together instead of just visiting each other's lives. I have a confession, Keith said one evening in December, almost a full year since they'd met. I'm happy, like genuinely happy, and I keep waiting for the guilt to hit, for feeling like I'm betraying Maya by moving on. But it hasn't come. Maybe because you're not moving on. You're moving forward. Brad pulled him closer on the couch. Maya will always be part of you, but she doesn't have to be all of you. My therapist says the same thing. Your therapist is very wise. Almost as wise as me. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. I really do. They spent their first Christmas together in Sydney. Not working, not avoiding, just being together. They visited Lucas's grave, brought flowers, told him about Keith. Visited Maya's memorial website, added new photos, kept her memory alive. And then they came home, made dinner, watched terrible Christmas movies, and chose to be happy. Not perfectly healed. Not completely over their grief. Just happy in the moment. Grateful for second chances. Building something new while honoring everything they'd lost. Thank you, Brad said as midnight approached, for taking a chance on a half-drowned alpha with amnesia. Thank you for terrible Australian humor and making me remember what living feels like. Keith kissed him softly. Merry Christmas, Brad. Merry Christmas, Keith. Outside, Sydney celebrated with fireworks and noise. Inside, two people who'd both lost everything and found each other anyway chose to keep choosing each other. One day, one moment, one terrible hospital coffee at a time. And somehow, impossibly, it was more than enough. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments, and feel free to share it with a friend who might love it too. See you in the next story.